My colleague stole my idea, passed it off as her own, and was getting a promotion, and I let her do it, with a twist. I've always been one to stay composed. It's how I made it this far in the corporate world. It's how I made it through the challenges, the late nights, the endless meetings, and the constant pressure. I know when to push forward and when to hold back. I know when to speak and when to stay quiet. And, above all, I know how to control my emotions. That's been my mantra, control. At least, it was, until now. It's been 8 years since I first walked into this marketing firm. I started as a junior associate, eager to prove myself, willing to take on anything that would get me noticed. Over the years, I worked my way up. Now, at 37, I'm in a position where I'm not just good at what I do, I'm exceptional. Every project I've handled with precision. I've put in the work, and it's always paid off. My colleagues respect me, my clients trust me, and, for the most part, I've kept my personal life separate from the business world. It was a simple rule I made for myself: don't mix business with pleasure. It worked for me, at least until I met Lauren. I first met her 5 years ago. She was ambitious, smart, driven, everything I admired. We clicked immediately, both professionally and personally. We spent hours brainstorming ideas late into the night, diving into projects together, and over time, our relationship evolved into something more than just business partners. She became my confidant, my equal, and for a while, it felt like we were unstoppable. But that was before things changed, before the cracks started to show. At first, it was subtle, a slight shift in her tone, a glance over her shoulder when we'd meet in the hallway. Then it became more obvious. I noticed how she began to take more of the credit for our work. When we presented together, she'd make sure her name came first, even though we both knew I was the one doing the heavy lifting. It wasn't blatant at first. It was small things, comments she'd make in meetings, ways she'd subtly steer the conversation in her favor. But I didn't care, or, at least, I told myself I didn't care. She was ambitious. I admired that about her, even if it sometimes rubbed me the wrong way. And then came the promotion, the one I had been working toward for the last 6 months. I had spent the last half year putting together a proposal for a major client. The client was huge, a game changer for the firm. I had poured my heart into it, working late nights, sacrificing weekends, and missing out on time with friends and family. It was going to be my crowning achievement. The project would solidify my reputation, and that promotion was mine to lose. Everyone knew it, everyone expected it. Except Lauren. I should have known better, should have seen it coming, but I didn't, not at first. She and I had always worked well together, but there was something about her lately that felt different. She had become more distant, more calculating. I could see the way her eyes would linger on the top spot in the office, the way she started to throw her weight around during meetings. It was as if she was preparing for something I hadn't been able to put my finger on. One evening, after a long day of brainstorming, I stayed late to finalize some details on the project. Lauren had offered to stay with me, to help out, but I declined. I didn't need help. I had everything under control. It wasn't until later, much later, when I was going over my work and checking everything one last time, that I began to notice something strange. I opened a document that was part of the pitch, one I had been perfecting for weeks. My fingers froze on the keyboard as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The numbers were all wrong, the graphs were distorted, there were discrepancies, big ones, that I knew hadn't been there before. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the more I looked, the more I realized someone had edited it, someone had taken my work, made changes to it, and then saved it under my name. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, to march into her office, demand an explanation, but I didn't. I couldn't, not yet. I closed the file and tried to breathe. I told myself it was just a mistake, a misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew the truth. Lauren had been in my office earlier that day. She knew exactly where I kept the files. She knew how meticulous I was about my work. And now, she had taken that work and twisted it to fit her own needs. The betrayal wasn't just in the theft of my ideas, it was in the way she thought she could get away with it. I spent the rest of the night in my office, staring at the screen. The hours passed, but I didn't move. I didn't leave. I couldn't. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about a project. This wasn't just about a promotion. It was about something much deeper. It was about control. Lauren thought she could take what was mine, walk in, and take my place. She thought she could climb over me, using my own work as a stepping stone. But what Lauren didn't realize was that I didn't need to yell or scream to get what I wanted. I didn't need to lash out. I just needed to be patient. I needed to be smart. I had known for a while that Lauren had changed. Maybe I was too blind to see it sooner, but the truth was undeniable now. She was ruthless, calculating, and most importantly, she was playing a game I had never signed up for. For the next few days, I kept my distance. I didn't confront her. I didn't let my anger show. That would have been too easy. No, I was smarter than that. If she thought she could undermine me and get away with it, she was wrong. She hadn't taken into account that I was better at this than she was. At work, everything went on as usual. Lauren and I passed each other in the hallways, exchanged polite, meaningless greetings, and kept our heads down. But I couldn't help noticing the subtle shift in the office dynamics. Everyone was starting to treat her like she was the one with all the answers. She was the one getting the calls, the praise, the attention. And me? I was left in the background, watching as everything I had worked for slipped further out of my grasp. It wasn't long before the email came, the one that invited me to the presentation meeting, the one where Lauren would present my work. I could feel my chest tighten as I read through the details. The subject line alone made me want to throw my phone across the room. Client presentation, Lauren Miller's new project. I knew what I had to do. I could have barged into the meeting room, stood in front of everyone, and called her out, exposed her in front of our colleagues, in front of the client. It would have been easy, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the depth of her betrayal, and I wanted to make sure that everyone, especially her, knew she hadn't earned this. So, I did the one thing that would truly leave a mark. I started preparing my plan. The next few days were filled with subtle movements, slips of paper, quiet phone calls, and strategic meetings. I worked quickly, gathering the pieces of the puzzle that would lead to Lauren's downfall. Every action was deliberate, every decision carefully considered. But I had to wait for the right moment. I couldn't rush this. There was no room for error. It wasn't until the day of the presentation, a week after I first realized what Lauren had done, that I finally put my plan into motion. The moment I walked into the conference room, I could feel the tension. I wasn't the only one who knew what was going on. Everyone in that room could sense the shift, the undercurrent of something not quite right. Lauren was standing at the front, speaking confidently, her usual charm masking the fact that she was presenting my work, my ideas, as if they were her own. She smiled as she outlined each part of the project, barely glancing at the slides on the screen, as if she was so sure of herself that the details didn't matter. The client, a man in his mid-50s with a sharp suit and a sharper gaze, was nodding along, clearly impressed. The others in the room were too, but I could see the slight flickers of confusion in their eyes as they tried to make sense of the discrepancies in the numbers. Lauren wasn't as sharp as she thought she was. I'd been careful to leave just enough doubt in the details, enough to make someone pause and think, but not enough to make them question everything outright. It was the perfect balance. The numbers weren't wrong, but they were manipulated. A few key percentages were changed. A few vital pieces of data were swapped. If anyone had been paying attention, they would have noticed. But no one noticed. Not yet. As the meeting went on, I kept my focus on Lauren. Her voice wavered slightly when she reached a particularly important slide, the one that outlined the projected revenue growth. I knew exactly what would happen next. She clicked the remote, moving the slides too quickly, trying to rush through the next part of the presentation, but I knew she had missed something. She had missed one key detail. It was right there, in the numbers she hadn't double-checked, a discrepancy that would be too large to ignore. I made my move. As Lauren was wrapping up her presentation, I walked to the front of the room, my mind racing but my face as calm and composed as ever. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to yell or scream. I only needed to ask one question. Lauren, I think there's been a mistake. She froze, the smile on her face faltering for just a moment, but she quickly recovered, flashing me that same charming grin she always wore when she was caught off guard. What do you mean? She asked, her voice suddenly a little too high, a little too defensive. I smiled back, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that said I knew something she didn't, a smile that said I had all the control. The projected revenue growth, I said, pointing to the screen. There's a discrepancy here. You didn't include the latest data from the Q3 reports. The numbers you've shown don't match the actual projections. The room went silent. Lauren's face turned a shade paler as she fumbled with the remote. She clicked through the slides again, trying to make sense of it, but I knew it was too late. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't double-checked the data, and now she was exposed. It was only a matter of time before the others caught on. The investors, the client, they were all too sharp not to notice. Lauren stammered, trying to cover up her mistake, but it was obvious. The confidence that had once been so easy for her now felt hollow. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The damage was done. She had been caught. And now, I was going to sit back and watch as her carefully crafted image started to unravel. The days after the presentation were quiet, almost eerily so. I kept waiting for Lauren to confront me, to say something, to at least acknowledge the damage I'd caused, but nothing came. She avoided me, as if she was trying to pretend that what had happened didn't matter, as if the mistake had simply been an anomaly. But it wasn't an anomaly, it was deliberate. It was the perfect opening to what I had been planning for weeks. I knew Lauren. I knew how she worked, how she thought, and most importantly, I knew how fragile her confidence was. She wasn't as untouchable as she liked to think. Her success had been built on charm, manipulation, and lying. She wasn't accustomed to being caught, but now, she had made a mistake, and it was mine to exploit. The idea was simple. I would let her hang herself. I needed to gather the right tools, plant the seeds of doubt, and wait for the perfect moment to let everything fall apart. For now, my job was to stay calm, to keep my face composed, and to ensure I had all my pieces in place. There was no rush. In fact, the longer I waited, the more delicious it would be. I began by revisiting the presentation files. I had access to them, of course, being the one who had created them in the first place. I went over everything once more, scrutinizing the figures, the projections, the supporting data, but this time, I wasn't looking for mistakes. I was looking for leverage. It didn't take long to find it. In the midst of all the numbers, there was one small detail, something Lauren had overlooked, a minor error, almost insignificant on its own, but with the right context, it could be catastrophic. I also dug deeper into the project's client communications. I had attended every meeting, taken every note, and had been a part of every important decision regarding this project. Lauren might have presented my work, but I had been the architect of it, and as the architect, I knew every inch of it. I knew the client's preferences, their expectations, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. It was the perfect storm. I wasn't just going to expose her failure. I was going to make sure it was broadcasted, loudly, to the people who mattered. The next part of my plan was subtler. I couldn't just rely on the mistake in the presentation. It wouldn't be enough. I needed to make sure that Lauren couldn't recover from this. That's where my position in the company came into play. I was strategic, calculated, and I had connections. People trusted me, and, more importantly, they were willing to help me. I began reaching out to a few key colleagues, people who knew the truth, who knew what Lauren had done. I started with Chloe, who had worked with Lauren for the past 2 years and was one of the few people who hadn't been fooled by her charm. Chloe had seen Lauren take credit for other people's work before, and I knew she would be a valuable ally. We met under the guise of a casual lunch in the company cafe. Chloe was always cautious, but today she seemed eager to talk. I could see the resentment in her eyes, the bitterness she had towards Lauren. I'd known for a while that Chloe hadn't been Lauren's biggest fan. They were like oil and water, two people who could never coexist in the same room without clashing. "You're right about her," Chloe said, her voice low, as she stirred her coffee absently. "I always knew there was something off about Lauren, but I never expected her to go this far. I saw the presentation. It's your work, Sarah. The numbers, the strategy, it's all yours." She didn't even bother to make it her own. I smiled, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Chloe's support was a crucial part of my plan. "I know," I said softly, "and she's going to pay for it, but I need your help." She looked at me, wary but intrigued. "What do you want me to do?" "Help me spread the word," I replied, leaning forward, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to make sure people understand what really happened. That Lauren is playing a dangerous game, and it's about time the truth comes out." Chloe hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'm in, but I'm not going to be the one to start it. Let's see how long she can keep this up before she slips again." I agreed. There was no need to rush. We'd let Lauren continue to dig her own grave, and when the time was right, we'd deliver the final blow. Meanwhile, I was continuing to manipulate the project's data. Little by little, I made subtle changes, nothing obvious, but enough to cast doubt when it was reviewed again. I sent the modified files to a few trusted contacts in the company, people who had the ability to leak them to the higher-ups if necessary. It would be my final proof, my final nail in Lauren's coffin. But I couldn't do it yet. The time wasn't right. I needed Lauren to feel secure. I needed her to believe she had one. The final piece of the puzzle was the client, the ones who had been impressed by Lauren's presentation, the ones who were starting to ask questions. They were beginning to doubt the numbers. They were starting to notice the discrepancies. It wouldn't be long before they came to me, asking for clarification, and when they did, I would be ready. The calm before the storm was almost unbearable. Every day I watched Lauren, seeing her glide through the office, confident, smug, as if she'd pulled off the perfect heist. She was basking in the glow of her promotion, as if it were hers by divine right. But underneath it all, I knew the truth. And soon, the world would too. The first hint of things unraveling came from the client meeting. It was scheduled to be a standard follow-up, but I could see the cracks already. I had subtly positioned myself in the room, standing just outside the spotlight, waiting for the right moment. Lauren was presenting, as usual, but there was an unease in her voice. Her slides were moving too quickly, her explanations too vague. She had learned my strategy, but she hadn't fully understood it. She didn't know the details like I did. And in the boardroom, when the pressure was on, it was all too easy to see. I watched as one of the investors, a man named Greg, who'd been involved in the project from the beginning, leaned forward, squinting at the screen. He asked a simple question. "Lauren, these projections. I don't see the breakdown for the secondary market analysis. Could you clarify?" She hesitated, the air in the room thickening with every passing second. She wasn't prepared for this. She stammered, flipping through the slides. The awkwardness was palpable. You'll have to give me a moment, Greg," she said, her voice higher than usual. "I'll just pull up the details." But there was nothing to pull up. The information was missing, and Lauren knew it. The analysis was buried in a part of the report I had worked on, the one I'd made sure to leave out of the files she submitted. I saw the sweat begin to bead on her forehead. That's when I knew it was time. The moment the meeting ended, I left the conference room, feeling the weight of my plan pushing me forward. I had already set the stage with my contacts in the company, people who were aligned with me, people who knew exactly how much was at stake here. I had them on standby. I wasn't going to let this moment slip by. I quickly made my way to the office of one of the senior executives, a woman named Rachel. She'd always trusted me, always respected my work. I'd made sure she'd seen the discrepancies in the project when I'd subtly dropped hints to her during the last few weeks. Now, it was time to reveal the truth. I knocked once before entering her office. "Rachel," I said, my voice calm, collected, though inside, I was shaking with the anticipation. "I think we need to talk." Rachel looked up from her desk, her eyes scanning me with a practiced neutrality. "What's going on, Sarah?" I walked over to her desk, pulling out a flash drive from my bag and placing it in front of her. I didn't need to explain. Rachel was sharp. She knew something was off about the project, and she trusted me enough to know that I wouldn't waste her time. She looked down at the flash drive and then up at me, a flicker of realization in her eyes. "You've got the files?" she asked quietly. "Not just the files," I replied. "I have everything, every document, every email, every calculation, and I think you should see them." It only took a few minutes. Rachel reviewed the contents, her fingers clicking through the files as the reality of what had happened sank in. The silence in her office grew heavier with every passing second. I watched her face as she processed the information, her brows furrowing in disbelief, then narrowing in anger. The pieces were falling into place. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I've been patient," I said softly, "but I won't let her get away with this. Not after everything I've done, not after everything I've built. I've worked too hard, and I've given too much. This is my moment, and it's time for Lauren to face the consequences." Rachel didn't answer right away, but she didn't have to. I could see the gears turning in her head. She knew what needed to be done. That evening, everything changed. Lauren's failure at the meeting hadn't been the tipping point. No, it was the leak I'd orchestrated, where I sent a copy of the full, unaltered presentation to the investors, along with a message. I made sure to highlight the missing market analysis, the discrepancies in her projections, and the errors she had so carelessly overlooked. By the time the investors started digging through the files, the damage was already done. Lauren's promotion was hanging by a thread. And then came the final blow. I watched from a distance as Lauren's meeting with Rachel unfolded. It was a private session, but I knew exactly what was being said. Rachel's calm tone didn't mask the finality in her words. Lauren was being questioned, her credibility shattered. Every lie she'd told was being laid bare in front of her. There was no escaping this. She couldn't hide from the truth anymore. By the time Lauren came out of the meeting, her face was pale, her hands trembling. She looked around the office as if searching for an answer, but there was no escape. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I could have said something, confronted her in the hallway, but there was no need. The look in her eyes told me everything. She knew she had been caught, and I had one. The next morning, the news hit the office like a storm. Lauren's career was effectively over. The investors had pulled their support. Her credibility was in tatters, and no one trusted her anymore. The promotion she'd stolen from me was now nothing more than a distant memory. And me? I had regained everything I had lost. My reputation was intact, my work respected, and my future in the company more secure than ever. I had waited patiently, I had played the long game, and now, I could finally feel the satisfaction of knowing I'd outsmarted her at her own game. As I sat at my desk, watching the fallout from the corner of my eye, I felt no joy in Lauren's downfall. It wasn't about her destruction. It was about restoring balance. It was about reclaiming my place where I deserved to be. And as I looked out the window, I realized something else. The hardest part wasn't the revenge. It was the silence, the waiting. But now, as I leaned back in my chair, I could finally exhale. The game was over, and I had won.